And we're live. Incredible Shrinking Man. I'm Professor Matthews, learning about movies. A few minutes early on this live stream, but I would say go to visit my Letterboxd and sign up and follow me. I'll look at your stuff, my newsletter, etc. But I'm going to go through a science fiction movie you may not know, and it sounds like a terrible B movie. Incredible Shrinking Man, which is a Criterion disc. You can see Criterion Collection, and not all Criterion Collection discs are great, for sure, but maybe there's a reason they curated this movie. And so I want to go through it. If you haven't seen it, this is fine. I will give some spoilers away, but that may actually set you up better to watch the movie with critical and informed eyes. Because this is a movie that seems simple and maybe schlocky on the one hand, about a man who shrinks all the way down and has to fight cats and spiders. And there's some special effects in this which show him getting smaller and smaller, like a 1950s B movie, which are fun, sometimes unintentionally funny. On the other hand, this is a very serious existential movie about how men, human beings, maybe women, although there's a difference between men and women in the movie, how men are shrinking because of science, technology, social forces, cultural forces, and the delusions that they're under are rapidly changing in the atomic age circa 1950. Now, of course, this movie was written by the great Richard Matheson, a very good writer, in my opinion, who wrote I Am Legend, among other things. And this is a book, first, The Shrinking Man, and then they Hollywoodized it as The Incredible Shrinking Man. So check out Matheson's work. And he wrote this movie, which is interesting because the second half of the movie doesn't have has hardly any talking in it. There's two halves to the movie. The first half is like a political, cultural, social, economic sort of tale about a man who is sort of declining in his own culture. On the other hand, the second half of the movie is like a Robinson Crusoe tale in which a ordinary person is trying to survive in a new harsh environment and gather tools and weapons and all that. And it has some thrills in that sense, but I think this is an ambivalent movie. On the one hand, it's very happy in its ending, or it seems like it. On the other hand, it's very dark and disturbing. And that may be the ambivalence of the atomic age and quantum physics, which this movie is dealing with, quantum theory, very small particles, and so on. So let's get right to it. So I'm going to show you slides. It's much more convenient to me to show images. And by the way, if you chat here, I will look at the chat in just a little bit and interact with the people who are chatting. So thanks for watching this. I'm going to go through this. This is totally impromptu, although I just taught a class on it, or for the first time I used it in a class. So I like to judge these movies by how complex they are. That's one criteria. So this movie hit economic aspect of life, the sociological, the political, the aesthetic, the scientific, the theological, the philosophical, the psychological. Go on and on through all of the disciplines. This movie's sort of interconnecting so many of them. And it's a smarter movie in that way. This movie is directed, by the way, by Jack Arnold, who you might know from Creature from the Black Lagoon and This Island Earth and a whole bunch of sort of semi-famous B-movie science fiction stuff in the 1950s. He was a long-time director, especially for TV shows. But this movie sort of near his peak of what he did. So here's the title card. This actually comes from the movie, The Incredible Shrinking Man. You see the cloud in the horizon. And this cloud is the novum of the story. So in science fiction, you've got the difference between you, the viewer, or you, the reader, and the world of the story is this vast change that's happened in that world to make it different from yours. That's what you call the novum, Novum. And in a lot of science fiction stories, it might be the nuclear apocalypse, the nuclear war that causes the post-apocalyptic world that you're seeing in the story. In this case, it's supposedly a radioactive cloud that comes along and affects or infects the Incredible Shrinking Man, whose name is Scott Carey. And this cloud, it's actually unknown origins. They speculate in the story that it's radioactive. I think there's other ways to interpret this cloud, but at least the threat of the atomic age changing people, here literally diminishing them, miniaturizing them, shrinking them, turning them into nothing. And there are a lot of puns in this movie, or a lot of puns you can derive from this movie. This man is literally turned into nothing by the atomic age. That's something you could say about the cloud that comes and hits him. So there's the cloud and optical effects. There's some cheesy special effects, but I actually like them in this movie. So if you watch it, it's actually good for children. I have an 8-year-old who's watched this movie twice, and it's very thrilling because the guy battles a cat and a spider and tries to survive in his basement. So it's kind of fun. But I was saying, it's for adults. It's pretty dark. For a middle-aged person, it'll hit you pretty hard. Anyway, the movie's opening shot is this. Fascinating because it's a moving environment. It's a fluid environment of change, the ocean. And then the camera pans up to the sky. And so you have earth and sky, or sea and sky, these sort of elemental forces of nature, which is one of the movie's subjects. In the movie, you've got a bourgeois man who's sort of controlling nature through his second nature, as Marx would put it. It's walling himself off from nature in his domestic sphere, his home, bourgeois, middle class, sort of American thing. He's going to go into a world of nature and have to survive in it. So I think the elemental forces here at the beginning are signaling a couple of things. One, there's something beyond our domestic spheres, our walled-off spheres of nature, technology, virtuality, and so on. Second of all, the Genesis thing. Elemental, this is from the book of Genesis, and very quickly we have two people, an Adam and Eve sort of character. And this man, not the woman in this case, like Eve, but the man will be cursed. The woman remains herself. The man the cloud hits him, and he has a fall, literalized in the movie, because he falls down his basement into the laundry chute. And you're going to see, if you think about it, all kinds of resonances with the Bible, particularly the first 3 chapters of the Bible, the Adam and Eve characters here of the man and the woman. Scott Carey is his name, as I said. And they're bougie. My students like to use this word bougie, which I think is derived from bourgeois, which is middle or upper middle class, or you could apply it at least in the 1950s to the bourgeois, who in this movie have a boat, and they're doing the ultimate bourgeois thing, the vacation. So you're going to see this economic aspect, the economic man here, be diminished into a nothing. He loses his job, he loses his money, he loses his house. His house becomes his own prison. It's as if the bourgeois man is falling and becoming working class, or even less than that, back into a world of primitive survival. And what, this movie asks a bunch of questions. Is the economic world of the middle class good? What's it doing to people? Is it a protective delusion? And with the atomic age coming along and changing this man, potentially cursing him or blessing him, how is the atomic age, this new scientific age, quantum theory, changing people, changing economic conditions? How is science affecting all realms of society, the psychological, the economic, the political, and so on? This movie has answers for all of those questions, or you can interpret it as having that. Here comes the cloud. This is probably the Pacific Ocean. There's hints that this is Pacific. I always like to take this as more open-ended. This could be any body of water, an uncertain body of water, but it could be the Pacific, where at this moment in time, the U.S. is at least testing H-bombs and other sorts of atomic weaponry, which in the movies, as you know, create monsters. Famously, right at this time, this is a 1957 movie, I think, Godzilla is created by an H-bomb and other, monsters in the Godzilla fair. And so what's going to ravage Tokyo is effects of the H-bomb. What are the cultural, political implications of H-bombs? Well, the environmental effects, ecological effects of H-bombs and later chemicals. As the 1950s were improving society with plastics and chemicals, they're all the rage. This movie has an environmentalist bent to it. So what are the ecological effects? Well, this man's nature, his own organism, himself, his body has changed or altered. Someone says it's Lake Michigan. That's probably Lake Erie, right? Factory smoke, smog from factories. Yeah, right. But there's another element to this. It's like this mystical cloud in between those two elemental forces of sea and sky coming at him. It's really interesting. So the blend of those two elemental forces. Is this man-made? Is this natural? I was taking this to be man-made. It's a radioactive cloud, as they say in the movie. But who knows how else you can interpret this as maybe a natural force? Here he is being blasted by himself as the Adamic character, Adam, on his brother's boat. By the way, vacations, total middle class thing to do to show off your status. And I take vacations, so I'm implicating myself. Show off your status that you have leisure time, you have the money to afford leisure time, you take vacations. Fairly new phenomenon from middle class, I think. I mean, decades old. And this guy is able to do it. But on his vacation, the bourgeois man is affected and changed and altered by this cloud. It could be the gods. It could be like magic fairy dust sprinkled by the gods to bless or curse him, right? In a sense, the atomic age is men becoming gods, as Oppenheimer would say in his famous quote. But, I mean, in a sense, this movie is fantastical and like a story of old, ancient literature, folktale. But it's also scientific in that it's got a plausible novum, radioactivity, chemicals, and so on in it that could actually literally change people in real life. So she's not affected because she's down there doing what? This is really interesting. The woman is going to go fetch him beer. She's acting like, quote unquote, a wench. They do this fake medieval dialogue where he's like, go fetch me a beer, wench. And maybe there's a feminist reading to this movie, or look at this movie as like the female and the males are affected differently by the scientific age. And his treatment of her throughout this movie is very harsh. As he diminishes and becomes disabled, she's got to deal with that. And he says at one point he's treating her like a tyrant. When he gets smaller, the smaller he gets, the more tyrannical he treats her. But the initial reason why he's the only one affected is he orders her in the playful way to go get a beer, treating her like an underling when maybe she's not. That's really interesting. So later, the movie fast forward 6 months at this point after he gets affected or infected. And you see another bougie thing, a bourgeois thing, which is to have a house pet. We're not very far into the moment where house pets come into the home and we start to afford things for, like this huge pet industry today. It makes billions and billions of dollars to buy stupid trinkets, elaborate gourmet food for your pets. Right? People treat their pets like their kids in some cases. And that's starting to happen here. The bourgeois thing is to afford, you'll see a milkman come to the door, delivers milk, and they're having a milk delivery to feed their cat. Why aren't they feeding their cat just scraps or like letting it find its own food? They are paying the milkman to come to deliver food to their cat. That's the bougie lifestyle, the bourgeois bubble that this guy lives in, which is going to be popped. And he's going to realize that his life means nothing. Actually, one way to interpret this is that his bourgeois lifestyle gives meaning to him. His house, his vacations, his cute wife, and all the things he can afford, his job, all those disappear. All those go away in the movie. So then what's the meaning of my life if I have no wife, no job, no house, my lifestyle's gone, my identity's changed. So it's a Job-like story that devolves or transforms into Robinson Crusoe. Like, I have no meaning. And this is movie is in the realm of existential philosophy. Totally. I need to have meaning, bring meaning to my life because nothing's giving it meaning. I've lost all the meaning to my life. I need to interpret reality so that I get meaning. Because otherwise, if I have no meaning, then there's no reason to exist. Those sorts of thoughts come up for this guy as the movie goes along. As I'm saying, I'm watching this with my 8-year-old, and he's seeing giant tarantula battles, and I'm seeing, this is like about middle-class people everywhere. Them feeling like they're literally nothing, they're absolutely nothing. By the way, I had a comment in my class the other day, and I think this is telling. It's I feel this way sometimes. It's quite common. A student said, even if there are large forces at play in the world, political, cultural forces, and they're doing things to me, I can't do anything in response. The topic was surveillance. So the government watching you, cameras everywhere, the CIA able to, hack into your laptop or whatever, and everything's being watched. There's no more private life, sort of, seemingly. And the student says, so even if I notice that, I can't do anything about it. Well, that's the little man idea in this movie, is that you are being reduced into nothing, and there's nothing you can do about it by larger forces. Here it's the scientific radioactivity of the atomic age and governmental testing and so on. You could put other things on this movie too. Entertainment. The entertainment industry is diminishing this man. You'll see that in just a minute. celebrity, social media in this case of the modern world. I think we all feel like, a lot of us feel like we're little and we can't do anything. And in terms of the universe, think about nature. There's a vastness out there, billions and billions of years, billions and billions of galaxies. And then the little things, billions and billions and trillions and quadrillions of atoms. There's a little world and a big world, the infinitesimal and the infinite, as the movie says. Who am I in this? I only last a short time. Why am I here? What is the point? That's what this movie is getting at. That's the philosophical, theological aspect of the movie that I'm starting to articulate. Here he is being measured by his doctor, who at first says he's making this up. He's like hand-waving, oh, you can't shrink. Or maybe they measured you wrong when you were 2 years ago. So, and I had a great comment in class today. Billy Varble, thank you, Billy, but your roommate said that this movie mirrors the 5 stages of grief, which we looked it up, and the 5 stages of grief comes to be a thing in the 1960s, so I'm not sure the history of this, but you watch this movie, and he does do the 5 stages of grief as he learns that he's infected and then affected by shrinking. And so one of these things is that his relationship with his wife completely changes. Actually, they become not married anymore. Here, and this is really interesting, his manhood is shrinking. So he himself is shrinking, his masculinity is shrinking, his manhood, and I mean that in a literal and metaphorical sense. So you think of all the people, all the men who have ED pills and so on. You get my hint? That's what's happening to him in a way. He needs a cure to solve it. He'd probably get a lot of spam emails today if he were looking for how to solve his manhood problems. But that's also metaphorical. He is less of a man, less masculine. He's less able to control his world. And so he gets angrier and more frustrated with people in his life. He's a subject of science, so they test him out and they tell him, this is super interesting, by the way, 2 things. You have been affected by this cloud, but the first thing that affected you was insecticide. They're like, think about a time when you've been sprayed by an insecticide. And he's like, yeah, I remember. And the doctor says, and I don't know if this is complete quackery in real world terms, probably is. The doctor says, you have insecticide in you, and then the radioactivity, catalyze the insecticide to make you start shrinking. So in a sense, this is an environmentalist story about the ecological effects of 2 things, chemicals and radiation. Both of which are championed as like we're progressing, we're triumphing, we're dominating nature. We can use these to change the world. There's a triumphalistic aspect, and it's in the movie. But the other is the darker aspect. There's lots of ecological and other implications and ramifications, and no one has thought those through. What are the effects of using chemicals everywhere? What are the effects of using of A-bomb testing on the world? And all the, how does something big affect something small? Big question in the movie. And have you thought through the ecological implications of things you're doing? This movie is like 6 or 7 years away from Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, for example, when she calls out DDT as a possible killer. I mean, I don't have a dog in the fight here. I'm not arguing for one thing or the other. I'm just pointing out that this movie has that sort of hint to it. And I wonder what Richard Matheson's point of view is. I don't know, the writer of the story. Anyway, one other consideration is his marriage. The effect of shrinking on his marriage is that his marriage withers away too. An interesting question. When you get sick, when you have a disability, when your life changes, when a person has a stroke, this is a disability narrative. It's an illness narrative. You could read it both ways or combined. What happens to a marriage when that happens? Well, he seems to believe that marriage is predicated on him being a normal person and living in his bourgeois bubble. When those 2 things go away, he becomes abnormal and his bourgeois bubble pops, he can't be married anymore. Really interesting, reflection philosophically on this man's belief system. Which, I'm interpreting this one way, you can interpret it in other ways, but this guy fundamentally believes that his marriage only works if he's normal, if he's healthy, if he's the right size. It doesn't work when it's not. That's really interesting because, the vows could be in sickness and in health till death do us part. He's not taking that seriously. Or maybe those weren't his vows in the first place. Also, this man's economic life is upended, as I've said. Here he's being told he's lost his job. His brother's here saying your business is going to fail, or I lost his job. So he's got to sell himself as a freak. That's the word used in the movie. He's a freak in a freak show, but he's sort of a proto social media celebrity. He's going to go out and tell everybody his story and become a celebrity, and the journalists will pay him for this. But immediately, there's nothing good about this. It results in unhappiness. And when he sells himself, and it sells himself for money, sells his life story for money, his identity tied into money. So here's the big reveal when he's 3 feet tall, and the music goes dun dun dun. It's funny but disturbing. And here he is looking out his window at people who are trying to see him, journalists, paparazzi, and other people who know about his story. And look how small and diminished and weak he is. It's literalized in this movie. The man who, politically speaking, think about it this way. The man who loses his voice. No one listens to this man. No one can hear this man. No one speaks for him. Think about the political implications of that, the political aspect of this movie. He's a man without a voice. He's become an other, right? Whereas he probably othered other people, he's an other now, and he's on the other side of that. So here he is, diminished, weak, puny, literally, but also metaphorically in terms of economics, politics, sociology, masculinity, and you go through the list. It's amazing how much this movie hits on all areas of life. And his wife is treated very poorly by him. The hope in this movie, and if this were a true Hollywood movie, there would be some cure for him. Probably. I mean, they would imagine some cure to fix him. There's a problem. He's shrunken down. The solution is science, a cure. That happens in a lot of shrinking narratives. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. There's a bunch of these shrinking person shrinking movies or stories or video games. And in this movie has a very dark ending. I'm reminded of I think it's a decent movie, although it got panned, Alexander Payne's Downsizing with Matt Damon, where a man elects to shrink himself, becomes a conventional social norm to do so. I don't think he's not, in that movie as well, treats it in an ambivalent sort of way. I think this one does too. He's not cured, and so he wants to spend time by himself. He goes off and he sees this world of fun, a carnival, but it's not fun. He sees it from a different point of view, a different perspective, literally because he's half his own size. Right? The movie literalizes, I've got a new perspective because I've shrunken. He sees the world as an other would, or as these, you see a bearded lady and a tall person and what they call a midget in the movie. YouTube's probably going to censor me for using that word, but that's the word they use. And the little people. And he realizes, oh, I love this shot because there's a bourgeois couple passing him by, going to have fun while he looks at horror at the freak show. And he actually finds a friend, temporarily, in a 3-foot-tall woman, who says, hey, deal with it, buddy. I was born this way. And, there are people who are shorter than normal. In fact, much shorter than normal. What are their lives like? It doesn't seem like this bourgeois man has considered this before in his life. Now he's become like them. Could we call him disabled or handicapped? Yeah, I think so. Once he could climb the stairs with ease, now he can't climb it anymore. Once he was the master of his own domain, now he can barely get around his house. And that's, he's disabled in the sense, thanks to the atomic age. But, the movie kind of may imply that he is having an affair with this woman, cheating on his wife. You could read the movie that way. You don't have to. But he has this relationship with this woman. However, he realizes he's becoming smaller still. Science tried to cure him or stop the growth or stop the shrinking, but now he's still shrinking. So he realizes that, and he runs away from her, losing all human contact, becoming, there you go. So now I'm going to start to spoil things if you don't want to be spoiled, but I've announced some of the themes of this movie. It's really interesting. Go watch it if you want to stop right here, because this is the second half of the movie, where he has a battle with the house cat, thrilling my 8-year-old, also terrifying my 8-year-old. But this movie, as I said, switches. 2 halves to it. 1, the first half, he deals with lots of people. 2, second half, Robinson Crusoe tale of a man on a vast primeval plain. His words, for his basement. He gets knocked down into his basement. House cat terrorizes him. He's got a place of refuge, a basement. Another bourgeois thing, by the way, to have a basement. I think, when did they start building basements in houses? And it becomes a place of terror, as it is in a lot of horror movies. Don't go into the basement. It's scary. It's dark. It's gross. That's the case in this movie for sure, but from a different point of view where ordinary things become terrifying. And so you can see the scale at which he operates. He's at a new scale. And there's the voiceless man calling out, but no one can hear him. And then he interacts with consumer products, consumer objects that advertise themselves. They're glitzy. If they were on a shelf to be sold, the matches here, which he uses in a Crusoe-like way. So a Crusoe story to me is ambivalent. There's a lot of science fictional tales like The Martian, for example, in which a single individual, a lot of times it's a man, tries to master his environment and survive in it and then thrive by making his own kingdom. In The Martian, he's stuck on Mars. He's got all these objects and he's got these problems to deal with and try to solve scientifically, through rationality, I suppose, how to survive in his environment. That is the case here. I've got a box of matches. I've got water dripping from the water heater. I've got a piece of cheese and a mousetrap. How do I survive? So it's kind of fun to watch that, right? To see someone try to deal with those sort of technical survivalistic problems. All kinds of reality shows about survivors on islands, as you know, are survivalist shows. The problem with that is that's not the only part of this movie. It's ambivalent. He can barely survive. This is dark science fiction. He's barely making it in this world. He might get killed by his water heater. He might get killed by a paint stick. And that's humiliating for the bourgeois, tough guy, normal guy, man. Death by paint stick, right? Death by needle. Death by spider in your basement. Those kinds of stupid threats. Death by drowning in your basement because of the water heater. You know, that's humiliating. And so there's those two sides. I'm trying to survive. It's cool. It's fun to watch a guy do that. But on the other hand, he's reduced to nothing. Literally. And metaphorically. There's another consumer product, coffee can used as a paint can then. And then he's got to use it in a different way. He presumably bought it with his money from his job. Now he's got to survive using it. Uses a match. Love this scene. Tries to jump across that gap there. The paint stick nearly kills him. And he's going to survive. So what is he trying to do is find this old stale piece of cake. Cheese on a mousetrap, cake. How old is it? How gross is it? But that's all he's got to survive. He's using a pin from a pin cushion as his weapon. He's a knight in a fantastical world, Alice in Wonderland-like, but he's been reduced to a pathetic weakling. And here, he's a prisoner in his own home. Wonderful little moment here, because now the bourgeois man who has triumphed over everything, dominated nature by secluding himself from it in his modern home. I'm not against these things, by the way. I do them myself. so I'm not ragging on them. I'm just interpreting them in a way they can be interpreted. But he is now a prisoner, and he says that's the existential problem. I'm trapped in a world of someone else's creation. I need to get out. They've locked me in this mental prison, and I need to burst out. That's a metaphor people use. It's similar to this, where he's looking out as sort of a Walt Disney World. Outside is this fantastical world of nature, wonder, his backyard. There's a wonderful little chirping bird there. He tries to get it to be his friend. Disney-like bird from Snow White and Bambi. Bird ignores him. And you get the hint that the bird could eat him. So really interesting play on Disney stuff there. And of course he runs into a giant spider in his basement, a tarantula. I assume this movie's in California, I think. Southern California? I could be wrong about that. I think that's the location of it. So there's a tarantula in the basement. I don't know if they have basements or they have tarantulas in California. I'm sorry to know nothing. I miss maybe Arizona. Who knows? There's his water heater, and it's going to cause a flood. Very interesting Genesis stuff here. So I called him an Adam figure. He's in exile. He's kicked out of his garden. Self-kicked out, I suppose, but which is his home with his wife Eve. Lovely little bourgeois home. And now he's exiled into this vast primeval plain. And so what happens? It's a desert landscape. And he's got to survive in it. A la, I suppose, Adam and Eve after kicked out of the garden. Maybe the Israelites wandering the desert, etc., etc. There's all those kinds of basic tropes in this movie. He's also going to get deluged by a flood from above. The waters above here which is the water heater. It's going to rust through, and the water's going to come and flood the basement and nearly drown him. There he is. Yeah, that's the water heater scene, where he's nearly drowned and nearly dies and falls down a deep, dark hole. Job-like, once again. So he's got to battle the spider, and it's really interesting, this movie. It's not a monster to be destroyed like a knight fighting a dragon. It's simply a competitor. He starts to get a more naturalistic, I know that's a abstract word, so I probably should define it, but a naturalistic way of thinking where this is just a competitor in an environment for resources and energy. This thing I respect over here, because it's doing the same thing I'm doing, which is trying to survive and keep alive and then sustain itself through energy and resources. So he knows that this is his main competitor in this environment, the spider, which he fights. Fun scene for an 8-year-old, also scary. He does defeat the spider, spoiler alert, kills it. There's a lot of gore that falls on him. And then finally you have these existential moments. This is the end of the movie, which is absolutely haunting. In one sense, this movie is about humans conquering the quantum world. Quantum physics, quantum theory, the atomic particles, harnessing them for the purposes of energy or destruction. Humans triumph or dominate over them. Adam-like. Adam's supposed to subdue creation in Genesis, the Genesis 1. But on the other hand, this puny little man has been made to see his true plight, that he is a puny thing in a vast universe of a lot of small stuff and a lot of big stuff. Small stuff he can't see, big stuff he can barely see with a telescope, but he knows there's stuff beyond it. So what is his... Well, I have more slides there, but maybe not. What is his point of view? His point of view being, at the end of this movie... Actually, I'll pull it up. I'll get the speech up here for you. He's got a big speech that Matheson gives him, and it's a sort of semi-triumphalist speech. It's one where he's optimistic about his. There it is. I'll get that on screen. Hopefully you can see that. I'll make sure I can see that. This is his speech at the end of the movie, where you see images of him leaving his prison home, going out into the natural world. A wonderful bird's eye shot of him looking down. The camera pulls up, and it looks like he goes from a little blip to then nothing in his backyard. And while that's happening, and I feel like he's going to die any moment by a bird eating him, or being stepped on, or being swallowed by an earthworm, and you know he's good. If he survives, he keeps diminishing to nothing. He's giving this sort of hopeful speech, which I just put on the screen. And it's really interesting and potent, profound, philosophical, edgy, maybe triumphalist, as students say. This was like a man still trying to dominate his environment, and this man hasn't changed his point of view, even though he's changed in size. He does change it a little bit, I think. He says... He says he thought he had thought in terms of my own limited, or man's own limited dimension. I had presumed upon nature that existence begins and ends in man's conception, not nature's. But now he sees things differently, so he's got a new perspective, he claims. He sees the infinitesimal and the infinitesimal, intimate as, life is a big circle, and they're two ends of the same circle, the infinitely small, infinitely large, the vastness of space versus the littleness of the quantum world. And he says, to God there is no zero, even though the infinite and infinitesimal make a full circle. This is a very dark ending to me, in that he's easily killed, or he's going to be infinitely lonely. There are no more humans left for him to interact with in the end. He's too small to have a social life. Too small to have culture. He's nothing in terms of culture and politics and society. But he claims to be something, and here's the existentialist giving himself meaning. Maybe it's a delusion. Maybe it's reasonable. It's a philosophical statement for sure. Now, at the end of this movie, so I'm saying that the first-person narrator and the visuals, to me, don't line up. The visuals are very dark, or imply very dark things. The speech is hopeful. The music, while it plays, is hopeful too. And so, are the results of the atomic age and the implications and the effects on all things good or bad? Well, it's ambivalent, probably. The narrator at the end says, "I still exist." Now, I think you could read this movie as having that sort of movie trope of the narrator thinks he exists, but maybe he's a ghost. Not to spoil it, but the Sunset Boulevard narrator is 5 years before this. He's a ghost speaking about, events in the movie. This could be a ghost haunting the movie, claiming he still exists, but doesn't. He could be dead, 1 second after leaving the home. But maybe he still exists as that sort of atom or quark that somehow can still have a voice. It's a really fascinating movie. Also, is it about the dominion of the quantum world? We're taking dominion of space, like in Star Trek. We're going to go out and explore vast new frontiers and populate them, and then sort of control them and harness energy from them. But what about the really, really super small? And only in this Alice in Wonderland, Gulliver's Travels sort of story, the second part of Gulliver's Travels, that's what happens in this movie. Does this man come to possibly dominating nature, the quantum world? Or is he swallowed up by it? So to me, this movie is totally fascinating. I mean, I've tried to interpret it in a complex way. It can be easily watched as simple entertainment. It can be sort of picked apart. The visuals are arresting, and add to the themes. I hope this made sense to you. So, it's a pretty profound movie, more profound than the title gives off, because the title sounds like a B movie, as I said. Anyway, comments. Not too many comments today, which is fine. I don't presume that many people have seen this movie, but now you're set up to go see it or to learn from it. JJ says, JJ said, Downsizing by Alexander Payne. I don't know if I recommend it. I love Payne. It's a weak movie in that it kind of goes all over the place. It's very sprawling. And then it still has, but Downsizing has, even in the title, has all of those, it's all about all aspects of society. How the science and technology affect culture, affect economics. Oh, there's lots of economic commentary in Downsizing. Affect marriages, affect social norms. How does science and technology change us or affect us? So it has that sort of direction to it. I say try Downsizing. You probably won't like all of it. Most people probably won't. It came out about 4 or 5 years ago. So Matt Damon's in it. Interesting movie. Yeah. You also say you had to be unemployed or work night shift to catch the live stream. Yeah, I don't know. This live stream is during lunch, my lunch break or other people's, then it's 4 p.m. in England and it's 9 p.m. in India. I forget, something like that. So, well, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Letterboxd, subscribe, newsletter, etc., etc. I hope you watch this movie and get out of it. Let me know your comments on this movie. I'd love to hear if you think it's respectable, first of all. If you think it's as rich and detailed as I've made it, or just some simple schlocky movie, what else did you get out of it? I think there's more things to be seen and noticed here. So, and you can take this sort of analysis to any kind of movie, which is, I think it's fun, and it makes it into art and lets it live. Hi everybody, and bye. I gotta go. See you later.